I've made my share of mistakes. I fell on my face and I had somebody pick me up and give me a second opportunity because we're going to make mistakes along the way. We're human. Be a mentor. Many folks have things to share, and I still listen to people younger than me who have things to share. I appreciate the time. I think you've got a really good thing going here, and I think there's a lot of great leaders out there, a lot of great young people with great opportunity. I think it's our job as well to mentor them and give them that leadership because we won't be around forever, and it's going to be up to them to pick up those pieces. So thank you for the day.
Hello, and welcome to The Clear Voice, brought to you by Clear Career Professionals. I'm your host, James Groom. With us for this episode is Clear's president, Michael Boese. Welcome back, Michael.
James, it's good to see you this morning and really happy to be on the program again. I think we have an amazing guest on that's going to be able to talk a lot about law enforcement and has a very different perspective. We had the opportunity to expand Clear Career Professionals up in the Montana region a year or so ago and had the chance to meet our guest and really excited that he's on the program and also a part of Clear.
Yeah, certainly a great career, and he doesn't look old enough to have been 40 years plus in law enforcement and city management, but that's what his bio says, and I believe him listening to him talk. So we'll get into it. Bryan Lockerby is our guest. He's a retired law enforcement executive who led the Montana Division of Criminal Investigation, which is the state's top investigative agency, and previously served as a captain with the Great Falls Police Department. He now leads Lockerby Leadership Group and has stepped into various roles in city management where he still serves. And of course, as Michael said, is working with us at Clear. Bryan, welcome to The Clear Voice.
Thanks, James. Michael, thanks for having me. I appreciate this.
Well, we're excited, and I wanted to start with something I saw on your website. On there, you wrote, "From the battlefields of history to the boardrooms of today, the principles of leadership remain the same: clarity of purpose, discipline in action, and courage in decision." Why did you pick those three principles, and why do you think they're important to leadership today?
Thanks for asking about that. And really, I mean, if you think about it, there's a military acronym called VUCA, V-U-C-A, that we live in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous time. And the way things are right now, we need some clarity of action. We need to understand, with all this noise around us, between emails, meetings, politics, budgets, things happening globally, we need to be able to stay focused on the task at hand and the mission. Our folks don't need to know the what all the time, they need to know the why, to give them some direction, because it's very easy for all of us to get distracted with that. A year ago, many of us were setting our budgets and making our personnel plans for what this year would look like, and nobody could anticipate that we would be dealing with the Strait of Hormuz and oil prices that we are. So we have to be flexible for that. The discipline and action part of that is just being accountable, having some follow through for our people, and showing some consistency. I think that's very important. And then finally, just having some courage in making some decisions. Quite often when you don't have all the answers. Sometimes, if you wait too long for every perfect piece of information, you've already missed that opportunity. So I think those really kind of rely on leadership principles and things that are important, that I value.
I think all three of those are very important. Clarity of purpose, setting those expectations. I think that's one of the biggest problems with law enforcement in general, is that everything that isn't assigned to somebody else seems to either fall on law enforcement, or sometimes public works. They get tasked with a lot of those things too. How important are setting those expectations in your organization?
I like to tell the story of the shopping cart test. So imagine yourself, we've all been there. We've all gone to the supermarket and loaded up that shopping cart and had to park at the far end of the lot and take all of our groceries out and unload them. And now we look behind us and we see that shopping cart return spot probably 100 miles away. And we have to make a decision. Are we going to leave the cart where we are and just drive back home? Or are we going to return that shopping cart to the place? There's no statute. There's no city code. There's nothing that requires us to return that shopping cart. It's purely an ethical and moral decision that we have to make. What is the right thing to do? And whether you think about it or not, somebody's watching you, right? So what we want to do is we want to instill that theme on the people that we work with, because we can't be in our building 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have to trust that they're going to make the right decisions. So using that shopping cart test as an example, have we instilled them the trust and the faith and given the ethical direction to make the right decisions even when we're gone? And I think that's how I would point that out.
As you pointed out, sometimes the courage in decision-making falls down to somebody who is trying to make the right decision, and there is a lot of things coming in and they do just need to make that decision. Do you also find sometimes it's the opposite where the right answer is easy, but some leaders find it hard to implement, whether that's political pressures or maybe they just don't like the impact that that's going to have, even though it's the right decision?
That's a good point and something to bring out. I think I didn't realize that until I was elevated to command level. And, you talk about that term lonely at the top, that you have this feeling of having to make these decisions of looking out for your boss and what's the right thing to do. And where's that balance? Having some mentorship helps with that, making sure you execute it correctly and safely. We had to make some very difficult decisions. One of the responsibilities I had amongst many programs is I ran the State Police Academy in Montana. We only have one for the entire state. We got hit during COVID, and when there were police academies around the nation that were closing, we needed public safety out in the field. And it was a critical piece. And shutting down an academy that only runs a basic class 4 times a year is going to have a significant impact on agencies that have invested in their folks and need to get them out on that street. We had to find a creative way to keep that academy open so that we could get folks through. That wasn't an easy decision to make. It put my staff at risk. People were dying around us. At the same time, another unit that I managed was the criminal records section. So anybody who's ever been fingerprinted in my state had to run through my unit. Well, when we have medical providers and nurses that are coming on board to help in that environment, and if we shut down and people can't be fingerprinted and get their criminal records processed, they can't help in that medical environment during that critical time. So again, we had to find a system. And that's what I mean about making some of those difficult decisions. It might be contrary to policy, but it was the right thing to do.
When you see, whether it be a police department or any organization breaking down or a leader struggling, do you find that one of those 3 principles that you have cited is the biggest culprit, or is it any and all of them?
I think the biggest gap I usually see, I would say all of them in that sense in different ways. I think a lot of leaders go into the position with good intent, and many of them, the majority of them, are able to follow through successfully. Where the breakdown comes through is in communication and the inability to implement effectively. People resist change. It's a normal thing. It's a matter of how you are able to implement that change or to do that process. And unfortunately, some folks just lack the EQ, or they're well-intentioned, but the output doesn't end up where it does, and then the organization goes into disarray.
Your principles don't come just from reading about them. They come from doing the job. Thinking back, what pulled you into law enforcement to begin with?
I jokingly say that it was 3 words: academic probation. I was in my first year of college and not doing too well, and realized it wasn't for me. And there was a transformative process where I encountered a law enforcement officer on an incident I was involved in. It was an injury hit and run where I was the injured person. It made me think I need to reevaluate my career, and I met with that trooper who was conducting the investigation. And that's what kind of gave me where that light bulb came on and said, this is what I want to do. I didn't get hired the first time. Back in those days, in the 1980s, we were competing with hundreds of other people for a couple of open positions. So I was persistent. The second year I was able to get hired, and I really haven't looked back. Over 43 years later, I'm still in law enforcement. I've lapped a couple of people. I work with their sons now, because I worked with the fathers, and I'm still in the career field. So I don't know if I'm not very bright, but I certainly got some scars along the way and hopefully developed some wisdom as well.
Yeah, that's usually the way to develop that wisdom is through the scars. Tell us what the early days were like in Great Falls coming into the profession.
It was a simple time. Of course, I'm 21 years old. My prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed. They give me a Model 6357 Magnum wheel gun, a heavy radio, and a police baton, and they tell me to go and do God's work with a 400-horse Chevy Malibu. And I was a liability waiting to happen. Fortunately, I had some good mentors. I had limited training, which I wish I would have had more of at the time. Obviously able to work the streets, didn't have the technology that we do then. One of the interesting things was we had our own dispatch center, we had our own jail. I had to work in the dispatch center, I had to work the jail at times, and you learn how to communicate. You develop those skills. And one of the things I think that we're fortunate in the public safety world is learning to take charge quickly and early. When you go on a domestic, if you're first on scene, you're taking charge of that domestic. If you're at a major incident, if you're first on scene, you're taking charge of that until you're relieved by somebody else. It gives us depth in leadership. It gives us a better understanding of taking control of situations. And now that I'm a little bit in a different part of the government sector, I see just how much value there was in learning that skill early, communication, and also understanding a little bit on how to work with human behavior.
Thinking back through the last 40 years, a lot has changed in law enforcement, and you cited the equipment, the technology, and the training that you didn't have when you first started. And a lot of places are getting that. And certainly there's a lot of modern and progressive police departments. But as we look around, there's also some that don't seem to have progressed very much. Where do you find the failure in those places that aren't doing it as they should be?
From a Montana perspective, right, we have 56 counties. We're the fourth largest state in the nation. To drive from one end of our state to the other takes 13 and a half hours. We have very rural pockets there where population might be 800 people for the entire county. The sheriff is a full-time rancher and a part-time sheriff. He's got a pickup truck with a 30-30 in the back window. He's attended the police academy once, and he doesn't get the kind of reps that you would with a municipal organization or a larger agency. You don't have the opportunity to attend conferences or to get the kind of training that you should have in order to keep up with the times. And your budget is extremely limited. You're still relying on radios. You don't have body cameras. You might not have an MDT in your car. You make do as you can. But, there's a downside to this in the sense that we are trying to progress public safety and bring them into the 21st century. But the reality is that the functionality of what that person has to work with. You might have two deputies. And I saw this a lot when I was with the Divisional Criminal Investigation. We would come in and help with homicides because they have a dead body on the side of the road and they don't know what to do. There's always a struggle for these smaller agencies who want to improve, but they just don't have the resources to do it. So that makes it kind of a challenge.
Michael, you're wearing your Lumet shirt today. I know you teach over there sometimes. Of course, some amazing professionals come through your course from some amazing agencies. And I know you talk sometimes about some of these problems, whether it be in this state or nationwide, where there's agencies that don't even have body cameras. Is that shocking for some of the people coming through your class?
I think it is. And I think from the public standpoint, unless you follow law enforcement or you kind of understand the national dynamic that is law enforcement or public safety in the United States, you have a perception that everybody wearing a badge has a similar background, has a similar set of core values, has similar resources. It's very different. And that's not to say that the people serving in those roles don't, for a majority, have a good heart of service and really want to intend to do the best that they can. But just like Bryan talked about, the limited resources that are available to some of these communities, as we even look around Texas and we travel around to some of our smaller communities or rural areas, I think it's really difficult to get that type of training that is needed to handle a multitude of situations. We often have people that are committing crimes in these communities that require a deep technical knowledge about how to solve them and really just trying to figure out how do we provide those resources to these small communities. But also in the United States, local law enforcement is very, very important to the communities they serve. We're not like Canada where you can come in and go, hey, well, we're just going to put a national or state police force in your community and have these communities buy into it and also have the same police legitimacy as their own, either local people or local elected, sheriffs or deputy sheriffs. There's a real conundrum, I think, on behalf of law enforcement executives to go, how do we bring professional service and a level of funding and commitment to these organizations across the board, while also getting the smaller communities to buy into the local trust that is needed for that locality. I don't know, Bryan, does that kind of resonate with you?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The one thing about those rural agencies, they're really good at relationships. That's what they've always done. And we know we get a lot of things done simply through relationships. They know their communities better. I've seen this in the past where you'll have a major event occur in a rural area and it's that local sheriff, it's that local officer who's got all those built-in relationships who can get things done. We lean on them a lot. Now, again, lacking in the professional skills, that's something I wish we could enhance.
Bryan, where has law enforcement improved the most in the last 40 years?
Well, that's a great question. I'm very proud of law enforcement and what they've done. And it's always a few incidents that really tragic incidents that cause a black eye on our officers. Everybody is really signing up to do the right thing. George Floyd, that was a real turning point for us during my career. And we saw a real difference there in community policing. I think the way our landscape, the way we as a culture have evolved, we're not this neighborhood anymore. And it's become more difficult for officers to engage with the public. I think we've done a good job of improving our relationships. I think we've done a much better job at transparency. I think we've done a much better job with the media. Back in my day, no comment was the first thing that you would say, and no comment doesn't work anymore. And we have made different approaches to that, and I think the public feels more part of our decision-making process. I've seen the growth of police academies, citizens academies, lots of awareness out there, and I think that's very healthy for law enforcement and public safety and kind of integrates us much better culturally with the communities that we serve. Michael, would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we're looking at these issues across the board, Bryan, I also want to talk a little bit about, larger communities really struggle with police legitimacy and sort of policing as well. Even down here, I'm sure they won't mind because it's a news story, but in the city of Dallas, for instance, they have a real hard time getting officers and getting themselves fully staffed. Their priority one calls are running in the double digits as far as responding to those even priority one calls, which disenfranchises the community from even calling, especially, on even major incidents. It's the ability to really take a look at this from a law enforcement perspective and go, how do we impact across the board on these things? And what I always talk about is those agencies who've trained their officers at the level of response to have the most professional response and the ability to mitigate crime as quickly as possible and or build those relationships at the street level, have the most success. But that also takes the largest investment of time and money on the front end and then that continual training process.
That's a great point. And it's that ability to serve. And I know that for me, when I was working the streets and I'm working on a Friday night and I'm humping from call to call and I get a suspicious prowler call, I'm going to run down an alley, shine my spotlight around and go to the next call, where really I should have spent some extra time with that citizen, engaging with them and having those conversations, because they're the folks that we're serving, but it's difficult to meet all of those. I heard somebody one time make the comment a police officer should be a victim of vandalism every 6 months and see how they respond to the public if that happens to them. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes you forget because you get caught up in all of those things that you have to do.
You talked about back when you started, it was hard to get a cop job. There were, 2 spots and lots of applicants. What has changed? What was going on back in the 80s that just wasn't a Montana thing, that happened across Texas even into the 90s. But at some point that changed. What can we learn from the past as far as filling our ranks, and what was done differently, or was it just the sentiment of people in law enforcement?
I've got a couple theories on it, whether people agree or not, and I'm not a sociologist and I don't have a PhD behind my name, but there's a couple things. One is I'm part of the tail end of the baby boomer generation. We are the largest, most powerful group that came. We're the product of World War II, right? Our parents, after World War II, were the product of that, those boomers. So there was a lot of us, millions and millions of us, all looking for work at the same time. That group is aging out. I'm an example of that, and I'm on the tail end of it. So we're not seeing as high of a population boom, but we are still working. The boomers tend to work much longer, and Gen X is following behind, but they're going to retire at the same time. So our population, in a sense, is declining, so people can be more selective about the kind of jobs that they want. I go back to George Floyd. When all of these things were happening, we all of a sudden had disinterest and we had this dislike of law enforcement. We had suffered a black eye from it. Places like Oregon, Minnesota, Washington, some of those high-profile states were having a large withdrawal of public safety because of all the criticism. Montana actually benefited from that. We had a record number of lateral transfers come to our state looking for work, willing to take a cut in pay, because in our state, we still back the blue, support law enforcement, and they still wanted to do the job regardless of the pay. So I think part of that is a little bit of a mix. Again, it's a population decline, and it's also has to do with just kind of how people perceive law enforcement. And it's a tough job. I think it's an interesting conversation. I do this in class. I said, would you tell your kid right now to go into law enforcement? No, I would tell mine, but really there's that little bit of a hesitancy that we all have where you really have to think about it. But it's an honorable career field. It really is.
Well, we talked about all the things that have improved over the last 40 years, technology and training and transparency and community involvement and those kind of things. What do you wish that we could go back and take from the past and bring into modern day? What are we missing? What have we lost over the years?
Are we talking about the social fabric? Because I think we could have some better parents out there, to be honest with you. We see this rise in teenage violence. We see this fragmentation of society. I hate to see this growth happen because of the internet and the influence that it has on people. Our attention span is shortened. You still need to have conversations with your kids. You still need to give them the realities of the world, and I think that deals foundationally with what we see with the rise in crime. And that's unfortunate. Sociologists will spend years trying to figure all of this stuff out. We see the increase in mental illness. I would like to see more support for that. We have high levels of substance abuse. We have drug problems. We've always had them, but it seems even more elevated at this point. I know with my agencies, we've had many more officer-involved shootings that we've been investigating simply because of rising levels of violent crime. But the contributing factors to that are substance abuse and alcohol as those underlying things that have that impact. So if I had a magic wand, I would certainly start foundationally with family values and instilling that, and then also seeing what we could do to help on the mental illness, providing some diversion programs. Our jails are way too full. It shouldn't be like that.
And one of the things I was curious about, you were talking about the resources available in Montana, and you were talking about the rural areas. What about the cities? I live in the Dallas Metroplex, and there's probably 50 cities around that I can drive to and have lunch at that are between 25,000 population and 100,000 population. I know what they're staffed at. A lot of them have pretty healthy staffs. Is that true for the cities in Montana, or are you guys also missing resources even inside the city limits?
Cities are also lacking resources. I go to any large agency, they're usually about 6 to 10% down. But I think that's the reality of it. And I know folks look at staffing levels, but if you're still meeting the call demand, are your staffing levels right? I think that's something to ask. What we see in Montana is these folks will get started in a rural agency. They can't pay very well. Larger agencies can pay better, so they hop over and make a lateral move over to the larger agency. Plus, sometimes they're bored. They want the excitement. They go to another agency to be a little bit busier. So it's across the board that everybody has some shortages. I think that's the simple reality of it. You will always be shorthanded. Just accept it. I was involved in hiring for 7 years, and just when I did the high five with one of my sergeants, we had another person put in their notice that they were planning to retire. So it's just the reality of it, and I think we'll have to deal with that forever.
And Michael, you've been up to Montana on various recruitments, and I know you've gotten to peek into a couple of agencies up there. What is your thought on the differences between whether it's staffing or technology or equipment?
One thing I noticed is I was able to ride with Great Falls Police when I was up there. And for a larger city, I was impressed with the number of staff that you guys have, in the sense that I think there were 6 people working the streets that night. In Texas, I think for the similar size population, we would have a larger staffing for our agency. When I was talking to the officers in Great Falls, they were like, "Hey, this is just normal for us. This is what we do." And they were busy, and they went call to call, but they were very professional with it. I think that was important. The other thing that I recognized is that they didn't have body cameras up there, and in Texas, there was a large initiative to get body cameras on all officers, and there were state grants to even help the smaller agencies get those body cameras implemented. There's some problems with that in the sense that the state hasn't continued funding at the same level as far as storage limits and all those other things, which has left some of those smaller communities and even the larger ones sort of with a budget issue. But body cameras was one thing. And Bryan, I think it's real interesting to maybe talk about some of the differences there. But I really want to also talk about, when I was there, you and I had a chance to talk about trauma that officers were experiencing. and not just on critical incidents that actually happened, but we had a really good discussion on anticipatory trauma that were able to send me some articles on. And I think that's something that a lot of law enforcement executives miss overall is we dispatch our officers out there to calls, and because they handle them properly and because they utilize their training and do such a good job of mitigating a lot of dangerous factors, we don't ever go with them and try to understand if they're experiencing trauma from, responding to so many critical incidents where in their mind, they are experiencing all of those horrible things as they're going to the scene.
Right. So on the first point on the body cameras for technology, yeah, Montana's simply limited, and all of this is budget based. You rode with the Great Falls Police Department. The chief is painfully aware of the need for body cameras, but he doesn't have the budget. Body cameras cost a lot of money. It's not just buying the cameras, it's the cloud storage that you need for it. And of course, police agencies are always inundated with freedom of information requests for whatever might have happened. And now you're involved in having to recover all of that information. So I think part of that is simply budget driven. I think the Highway Patrol is testing it. Fish and Game wardens are testing the system with a few of them, and it's slowly growing, but without funding and if your priorities are somewhere else, then those body cameras aren't going to be implemented right away. So I would say for Montana, about 40% of the agencies in the state use body cameras consistently. Yeah, it was a great conversation, Michael, about trauma. And, I think we've done a really good job over the years of destigmatizing the impact of the type of things that officers see in the field and being able to talk about it more. And that there's been a shift now on this resilience piece and building the foundational part to better prepare our folks what they're about to see and how they can process it. But having come across this article recently about this anticipatory or secondary trauma was kind of revealing to me because I didn't think about this. And I think there's two ways to look at it. One is the officer is en route to the call, or all the officers are going to this call. Let's say it's a possible shooting, dead baby call, whatever. You already are in your mind or planning what you might be seeing. And that's what they mean by anticipatory. But at the same time, that secondary trauma also impacts the people around. That's the dispatcher who took that call, who doesn't get to go on the call, but imagines what they're hearing on the phone, the officer's change in inflection in the voice, and all of that, and they internalize it. And how does that crush of those emotions, time after time after time, have an impact on the psyche and the ability to function? And that's something I think that we forget. Quite often we will have a critical incident debriefing over a major incident, but we're not thinking about the repeats of that.
Bryan, would you say that law enforcement is harder today or harder back in the 1980s?
Well, I think it's harder today. I mean, I just look at the equipment that the officers carry and have to be responsible for. I don't know if I could do it. I mean, life to me in that sense was simple. You had a radio and a car, and that was it. And now you look at these load-bearing vests, you look at tasers, you look at all these other pieces of equipment that officers have to carry. Just physically, you can see the complexity of the world that they live in. I want to say in the 1980s, even in my time, it was pretty black and white, and you didn't have all these other social issues that you were having to deal with and try to resolve. So it's become much more complex. The Supreme Court has made many more decisions that affect public decisions. You have First Amendment auditors that are videotaping your every move. Everybody has a cell phone, is second-guessing a decision. Even in an officer-involved shooting, you have multiple camera angles. You have all of this data, which quite often benefits the officer. And I've just seen culturally people challenging law enforcement anymore, which was really unheard of back when I first started. I personally think it's tougher, but it's manageable. At the police academy, we've modified our training to help officers deal with some of that. We give them First Amendment training. We talk about forensic interviewing for children of sexual assault and how to manage that and provide them more resources. In one sense, we had less resources for people to turn to, and there are more resources available now. But again, we're back to this VUCA thing, that things have become much more complex than they were back in the day when I started.
As we've added this equipment, it's made us be able to respond to more things and be able to handle things differently than maybe we could have when literally you might have had just a nightstick and a pistol and a badge. Now we have all these tools, which is good. I mean, in Texas, at least, officers are required to render first aid and all these things that got stacked upon us. But that means we're less of an expert because we're spreading our skills thinner, and there's a lot more expectations that we can handle anything. I think that has increased the complexity because there's all these skills that you have to have in addition to what was already part of the base job.
Well, and that's a good point, but have we become less of an expert, or have we had to become more of one? Think about drones, right? And we now respond with drones to an in-progress scene as the officer is en route. They've made technology, I just saw this last week, where they have drones installed, they're testing it in schools to respond to an active shooter event. Really, it's just such a unique world, and we talk about there isn't much to do in law enforcement. Holy smokes. I mean, between the tactical side and drone operation and narcotics and all these different things that we've expanded to, it's pretty remarkable.
I think it's still a very exciting career path. And I mean, it's a fun job. It's very tough, but it's definitely got a lot of good pluses to it.
Yeah, it's different peeking behind the curtain, isn't it, right? As the public driving from 9 to 5 out and about, I mean, you just kind of go about your business. But all of a sudden, when you're working on a night shift on a Saturday at 2 a.m., holy smokes, that's just a totally different lifestyle.
You served many decades in Great Falls and worked your way into the administration there before transitioning to the state's Division of Criminal Investigation. For those folks that aren't from Montana, what that does and what you did there and what you thought about serving in that role.
Thanks. So I had 31 years when the incoming Attorney General called and said, would you be interested in running the State Divisional Criminal Investigation? It is a agency that works for the Department of Justice, and it would be the equivalent of like the state version of the FBI. 21 different programs, police academy, major crime investigations, embezzlement, human trafficking, missing persons, crime victim services, CGEN systems, NCIC systems, Amber Alerts, lots of different programs that we were managing. It was a challenge, but I also saw it as an opportunity to help shape law enforcement for our state. I would equate it to for Texas DPS, very similar. The only thing different is we're not a state police, and I did not have state troopers. The colonel of the Highway Patrol was my counterpart, also a part of DOJ, like the Motor Vehicle Division and the Crime Lab. So it really gave me a full statewide picture of the organization. We have a very unique narcotics unit. They're purely undercover. We're on loan to multiple agencies. We do murder for hire cases. We're working cartel cases. We're working on federal task forces. I was part of the Joint Terrorism Task Force. They were actually in my building. My State Fusion Center was there, so we worked criminal intelligence as well at the national level. Pretty remarkable opportunity for me. I did that for 2 terms with the Attorney General, and then when he termed out, the new incoming Attorney General kept me, so I did that for a total of 12 years. Great exposure, great experience, and one thing I kind of wanted to touch on was Native American reservations as well, because we have 7 Native American reservations in Montana, and we had an MMIP, Murdered Missing Indigenous Persons program, where we provided support to the reservations and in human trafficking. So networking with tribal land is also something that we supported and was a unique challenge all of its own.
Out of all those divisions that you ran, which one was your favorite? Which one did you like dealing with the most? And which one was a thorn in your side? What was the toughest challenge?
I think it goes down to the core mission, right? Just like when you're running a police agency, patrol is the backbone of the organization. If I had to critically look at my division at the DCI, it was major case. We were dealing with officer-involved shootings, whodunit homicides, cold cases, embezzlement, fraud, malfeasance, all sorts of things. So I think that was probably the busiest unit. I can't say my favorite because they all had their special niche, and I'm not here to take sides, right? My job was to be Switzerland, just as I am right now. But for challenges, really no one was a thorn. I had excellent leadership at every level. It was manageable. But the biggest challenge was getting outside groups, politics in particular, to understand what we were trying to accomplish. So, for example, we wanted to get license plate readers. We saw a value in license plate readers for the state, but yet there was political resistance because people considered it invasive. They felt that there would be some invasion of privacy, whereas on the law enforcement side, we're only looking at it for public safety, not to be invasive. Getting past a lot of those political hurdles was probably the biggest challenge. And again, always funding. One unique unit I had was victim services. We spent a lot of money arresting people and convicting them. But what about the people who are victims of the crime? What about helping them out, giving them restitution? Matter of fact, my victim services unit had a budget, a burial budget. So if your loved one is killed, we would provide funding to pay for burial costs. Not everybody has the money to bury their loved one who was just murdered. But we had $2,000 per burial. So we had to fight at least 2 sessions in order to get that amount increased because it hadn't been changed since the 1970s.
For those leaders that are operating in these organizations, what is your secret to combining all these divisions that have different priorities and then tying in all these outside stakeholders, whether it be politicians or local agencies or federal partners? How are you so successful at that over the years?
I don't know if I was successful. I survived it. So I've kind of described my job, and I think any leader's job is to be a javelin catcher. Your job is to make sure your folks can go unhindered to do the job that they've been tasked to do and to provide them with the resources that they need. I jokingly said one time, it's kind of like having a bunch of babies and one individual baby in every room, and it's crying, and you've got one small jar of baby food and a little spoon, and you're running from room to room to room trying to keep them occupied. The bottom line is it comes down to having excellent leadership around you. I feel that I was fortunate enough to build a really good team around me of competent people who came to me only when they had an issue because they were really good managers and really good leaders. Were there some problems along the way? Yes. And they had to be shown the door to a certain point until I could get that team I needed. And it took me about 5 years to get there. But once that team was established, I don't want to say it was easy, but holy smokes, we got a lot of stuff done, just collectively, even dealing with the legislature, dealing with budget, finding ways to make things work, providing input where we needed. A highly competent team, high-functioning team can really get a lot of things done.
Out of all your years in law enforcement, do you have one or two highlights that you just are so excited that you got to be a part of?
You know, sure, it'd probably take me a while to think about it. I just feel fortunate. I mean, I'm a street cop from Great Falls, Montana, a 60-man agency serving a population of 60,000. And I've been fortunate to go to the FBI Academy. I've met presidents on security details. I've contributed to 2 presidential commissions and given some direction at the national level. I just feel very fortunate to have many of those opportunities. And I think it's kind of rare, but I always kind of want to give that back. The greatest value I find now is I help teach executive leadership at the police academy to instill some of that wisdom and some of that experience on those officers. For me personally, the most fun I probably had in my entire career was working undercover narcotics. If you can imagine me in the late 80s during the Miami Vice days, I had a mullet. I was driving a Trans Am. I had parachute pants and a pink shirt, and I was rocking it. And I was on loan to the DEA. I was on loan to the FBI. I was buying drugs locally and working a lot of cases, and that was a lot of fun. People say, well, wasn't that dangerous? And I said, well, it's not as dangerous as being an officer at 3 o'clock in the morning in a rural area making a traffic stop when you don't have any backup. I think that, in a sense, that was kind of my most memorable highlight were those times.
Well, if you have any pictures from those days that you'd like to share, we'll throw them up on the clips so let everybody see what it looked like back then.
I have mullet pictures, yes.
Montana is one of those mysteries for a lot of people. It was several years ago that most of us, if we were fortunate enough to get to go to Yellowstone or, some of the nature out there, that's what we knew about it if we didn't live there. But now we're all experts on Montana because of Yellowstone, and I think Marshals is the new show that's on. Is that something that has helped Montana, those shows, or has that been a hindrance?
It depends on who you ask. So if you ask the tourism board, it helps. I think they did a study that 500,000 people were influenced by watching a television show dealing with Montana just last year. It brought 500,000 people in. Many of those went to some of the sites where Yellowstone was filmed. And actually, river runs through it is still the number one reason that people come to visit Montana. Yellowstone is number 2. I currently have the sheriff of Madison County in my executive leadership class, and this is where Yellowstone was primarily filmed. As a matter of fact, there's a new show coming out called Madison, which is based on the Madison River, and was filmed here in Montana. And he said he gets calls almost every day from people wanting to fill out job applications to work for his sheriff's office. And we all know the reality of it isn't, this is not what life is like. I watched one episode of Yellowstone and I recognized one landmark, but I couldn't watch it again. Some of my staff have actually been extras on the show. They've shown me clips of it. But, it's good for tourism. It certainly portrays the wrong image of what law enforcement is like. Believe me, that's not what it's like.
I find that Hollywood obviously turns that, whether it be Yellowstone or any other cop show, and probably for a lot of professions, they feel the same way. I know I've talked to doctors that some of those ER shows and things like that drive them crazy as well. Do they ever get anything right when it comes to law enforcement?
No. A simple thing like, tactically not blading against a door instead of standing in front of it. When they're involved in these shootings and they recover quickly, they don't realize the trauma that's involved and the effect and the impact and the ripple it has on an entire organization, not only an entire state of law enforcement officers. I don't think there's enough. It's simply Hollywood. It's glammed up. I have yet to find anything totally accurate. I remember watching the one scene that I did watch. There was a bar fight outside of a bar in Bozeman, Montana, and a sheriff pulls up and breaks it up and tells everybody to go home. That wouldn't have happened. We'd have been arresting people, we'd have been charging them, and we'd have been moving on. We don't tolerate behavior like that.
So don't come to Bozeman and try to reenact that scene and think you're going home.
Right.
I wanted to say that my experience with Montana has been great, and I've told this story a couple of times, but Bryan works with a great city manager up in Great Falls, and when I was up in that area, I asked Greg, the city manager, where I should go hiking, and he told me a spot. And I had kind of an experience with a grizzly bear there. I didn't see it, but I saw the state police and a couple of the deputy sheriffs out looking for a grizzly bear, who reported to me from the people that I was walking past was trying to attack people or whatever. And so that was a whole new experience, going on a hike and having just the added burden of, hey, I might run into this grizzly bear. And so Montana is one of those places where there is a lot of nature there, and you do have to be prepared to confront wildlife. And so I think it's a really cool type of lifestyle you have. You have the cities, some smaller towns, but also you have just vast amounts of nature that really kind of reminded me of probably what life was like early on when the country was developed. Yeah, I imagine working in law enforcement there brings all sorts of other challenges that may not be existing in some of the other places throughout the country.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was sheltered working for a municipal agency, right? I said at that time we were a 60-man department serving a population of 60,000. And once I started working for the state, and I had an entire state to be responsible for, to this vast environment. Montana, I like to describe as half mountains and the other half is flat, where you can watch your dog run away for 3 days. And I'm sure areas of Texas are very similar to that. Culturally, it's a little bit differently. Recreation is a bit differently. Animal threats are different. But to put it in perspective, I've never been a sheriff. I've never run a jail. I've never dealt with search and rescue. I've never had to deal with forest fires. So all of those things, were something new to me. And fortunately, one of the bureau chiefs I was working with was a former sheriff, and he was able to educate me about some of the challenges. So, not only like dealing with wildlife, but dealing with some of the cultural differences when the challenges with the sheriff's office and the police department and how they approach things and how they look at challenges was really kind of a unique perspective.
And just for perspective, at least from what I know, if you're coming from a city to visit Montana, you don't have to really go outside of the city limits to maybe encounter some of these wildlife. Like some of the cities, especially on the edges of it, you may find these. You don't have to drive 100 miles into the wilderness, I guess.
Right now, I can take 20 steps and I'm standing on the banks of the Missouri River, and I could be fishing immediately. Or the police department I work for, same thing. So resources are there. We're dealing with wildlife issues. We're dealing with moose. We're dealing with bears. We're dealing with mountain lions. All of that kind of unique stuff that probably you wouldn't encounter in some of those other areas. But Montana is seeing growth as well, and we're having to adapt to that because the animals are getting pushed further out, and they can only go so far. So they're coming in here. So it's really kind of a unique challenge for Montana, but it's a great place to be.
And at some point in time, you retired from DCI and you transitioned into city management. How did that come about?
I had finished my career. I decided, 43 years was a good run and it was time to stop. And it really wasn't that I didn't love the job, as I was getting tired of the legislative sessions and I knew I was going into another one. I just didn't want to do it. So I retired in January of 2025. I had a really nice retirement plan of how I was going to kind of do some projects. And about 20 days later, my phone rings, and it's the Great Falls city manager. We'd known each other for many years. And he says, "How would you like to be the deputy city manager for a while?" He says, "My current deputy city manager left about 6 months ago. I thought I could keep up with the workflow, and I can't. I'm in the process of trying to find someone to hire. I just need some help with some special projects. Would you do this?" And I said yes. So I was retired for 20 days. A 3 to 6 month stint as a deputy city manager ended up being over a year. That's how I met Michael. That's how I met Clear Career, because they helped identify a solid candidate to replace my interim position. It really was a great opportunity for me. You talk about transferable skills. If we've been in a leadership position long enough, or any positions, you start to develop these transferable skills. So I'm dealing with public works, I'm dealing with park and rec, I'm dealing with planning, fire department, police department, all just from a little bit different kind of a lens. And that really was kind of a unique perspective. Interestingly, now that Clear Career helped identify and hire a deputy city manager, I've been moved over to park and rec for the last few months, helping out there because they're without their director, who's just recently been identified and is going to be hired soon. So I jumped from police work to deputy city manager to now a park and rec department. Really been kind of fun and different.
What was the biggest challenge in that transition for you?
I don't call it a challenge, but it was just, one unique thing is everybody sees an issue as a crisis, and they come to you with this crisis and this problem to solve. And my first response is anybody dead? And then they'll say, well, no. I said, okay, so we got some time to think about this. How about a sleep cycle? How about we kind of walk through this whole thing? In the public safety career, you're always really dealing with a true crisis. And the perception from other divisions within a municipality are completely different. Now, I had to eat my words. Last summer, I made that comment, is anybody dead? And they said, yes, somebody is dead. And I go, what do you mean? And they said, well, we were closing up one of the parks and somebody died in one of the outhouses. It turns out an individual, a homeless person, had passed away, cardiac arrest. So now I couldn't say that as anybody dead because somebody was. And now we had to implement some kind of a policy on how we deal if we find a deceased person in a park.
James, when he's talking about parks, I think, Bryan, I'll probably get the number wrong, but the city of Great Falls has something like 50 parks that you're responsible for. When people think parks, most cities are thinking 5 to 10, but you guys really do parks.
Right. And we have 60 miles of trail. Because of the Missouri River, they implemented a very unique and special trail system here that people from all over the country and Canada come to use, off-road and regular trail. So we maintain all of that, and it's really pretty unique. But at the same time, I've enjoyed it. Just the other day, we did the annual spring duck release and released all the ducks into the pond. Just before that, we hosted the Easter egg hunt. In a couple of weeks, we're going to be hosting an icebreaker road race. That's fun. It's really different than having to do, law enforcement, kind of see the dirty side.
Michael's talked about in his transition from police into city management, some of those same problems with people thinking everything's an emergency. Sometimes I guess it could be, but a lot of times it's not quite as big of an emergency.
Right. But you know what? Budgets are no different. Budgets are always going to be an issue. Personnel issues will always exist. Staffing levels will always be an issue. So, that part of it was no different. It was easy to jump into. And I'll tell you, the city manager has been awesome. He's a great leader. He's a good mentor. I learned a lot from him through my time working with him. And I think regardless of how much time you have on, if you have somebody who can mentor you, there's great value in that.
Bryan, outside of all the other things that you do, I know you shared with me that you recently completed an organizational assessment for Montana Fish and Wildlife and Parks that led to some significant changes there. I know you can't discuss a whole lot of the details, but how important is work like that, and what can you tell us about organizational assessments?
We talked about leadership challenges in organizations, and a lot of it can have a very significant impact on morale if you go about trying to implement change the wrong way, even though you could be well-intentioned. And I think that's what I quite often see is that organizations don't thrive. I use the term the North Star. What you want for an organization is to have a North Star to give them guidance regardless of what the situation is or who's gone or who's in place. If you imagine yourself lost in the mountains in the middle of the night and you don't know where to go, you orient yourself by looking up into the sky, finding the North Star, and now you know where north is. And that gives you some sense of direction. Organizations are kind of the same way. What you want to build are systems in place that allow an agency or an organization to survive regardless of the type of leadership or the kind of issues that may be affecting it, that you can orient yourself and you can still know what direction you're going. One thing I see quite often is people think that a short-term solution is to do this, get rid of this person, change this policy, and everything will be fine. And that is not a solution. You need long-term systems to be in place to allow organizations to be healthy and to survive. And there's mechanisms, there's processes that you could put in place to do that.
And Michael, when you look at organizational reviews, what is the answer to the question of why does, whether it be a state agency or a medium-sized police department or other department in a medium-sized city, all the way down to a small police department, why do they need an outside look? Why can't people just internally handle everything?
I think a lot of the times we may be too close to the problem. Maybe we've been really working on what our structure, what our strategic plan is, what our personnel are. Also, you build relationships when you're in an organization, and sometimes those relationships can cloud maybe the performance issues that somebody's having, or even on the opposite end, maybe you've pigeonholed someone who you don't think can do well, but they really can. Trying to kind of figure those things out, but really from an outside perspective, getting in and looking at their systems, their processes. But often what I find, Bryan, and I'm sure your experience too, is everything almost always boils down to a people problem and how we're managing and communicating with our people within the organization. And communication frequently drops off at a lot of these organizations. I think people always perceive they have good communication, but just because you're talking doesn't mean you're communicating. And really being able to look at those core communicational assets and go, how do we really expound on those and make sure that people are actually connecting and solving problems, sometimes at the most basic level.
Michael, I think that's a great point, and I totally agree with you on that. I'm on the communication piece. And my most recent assessment that I did, that was one of the key issues, was I came to realize just how out of touch command level was with their folks. They saw things one way and thought they were being effective, but at the other end, that was not happening at all. I think having like 360 assessments on a regular basis, getting that feedback loop complete is really important. I've done that organizationally in my own organization just to make sure people were getting my message correctly, and I requested a 360 feedback from my supervisors on myself. They're honest people, and there are parts of myself that I was not aware of that I thought that I was being effective with, and I realized I had to change myself. It wasn't the people receiving it, it was just the way that I was delivering it.
Those leaders who say they don't have any blind spots, that's your first blind spot.
Yeah, you bet.
Well, Michael, before we wrap up here, is there anything that we didn't get to with Bryan that you want to cover?
I think it was a great conversation. And like I said, we are so excited to have Bryan as the Clear Career family. Not only do we do recruitments, which Bryan will and has been very helpful on, but also as we really get into these organizations and look at the organizational assessments, being able to team with Bryan on looking at, these different places and how do we really analyze their performance. And what I always tell people is you don't have to wait till there's a problem to hire an outside assessor to come in and kind of look at your organization. It's really good to do those health checkups on a pretty regular basis. Really, in the grand scheme of things, they're pretty low cost, especially when you're using Clear Career to get in and kind of identify some of those issues and really take you to the next level. We are super excited to have Bryan be just a part of what we have going on. I love his story, and it's often I find myself in awe of how many amazing professionals that I get to interact with on a daily basis, whether it's just people on the Clear team or just working with government organizations. So many people that I've interacted with have a deep heart for service, and I know Bryan is one of those folks.
Well, Bryan, thank you for being here with us and sharing with us about your career. Before we leave, I'll let you have the last word. Do you have any advice for leaders that are looking to take the next step in their career, or maybe feel like they need some help with communication or anything else?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And Michael, thank you for the kind words. I have to say, since I've come on board with your team and I've met them, virtually or in person, really a sharp, diverse group of people, really a good depth of knowledge. I mean, I think you really are picking some folks that have a lot to contribute from different perspectives. I'm very impressed, and I think there's a lot of good work that your company can do for a lot of organizations. I don't want people to think in a linear sense, just police organizations. I think there's a lot of similarities, from all levels. Final words. I mean, it goes back to that shopping cart test, doing the right thing for the right reason, maintaining your ethics, standing firm in the face of adversity, showing your folks some grace. I've made my share of mistakes. I fell on my face and I had somebody pick me up and give me a second opportunity, because we're going to make mistakes along the way. We're human. Be a mentor. Many folks have things to share, and I still listen to people younger than me who have things to share. So I appreciate the time. I think you've got a really good thing going here, and I think there's a lot of great leaders out there, a lot of great young people, great opportunity. I think it's our job as well to mentor them and give them that leadership, because we won't be around forever, and it's going to be up to them to pick up those pieces. So thank you for the day.
Thank you, Bryan and Michael, for being with us. We appreciate that. Michael, I volunteer if Bryan and Mark need any help up there in Montana. As long as it's not wintertime, I volunteer to go help them. So just let me know. Bryan, you've made a big impact so far, and we're excited to see your continued involvement in improving the daily lives of people in Montana and beyond. To the listeners, thank you for what you do in your communities. Please check out clearcareerpro.com for the latest job opportunities. Like and subscribe to The Clear Voice, and we will catch you next time.